Good evening. It has now been more than a month since protests broke out over the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act in different parts of the country. Even today, peaceful protests are going on in different corners, from the women-led demonstration at Shaheen Bagh in Delhi to ordinary folks in Patna, from Kolkata to Bangalore. India has not seen this kind of popular resistance in a long time. At many of these protests, people have made their point very simply by reading aloud from our Constitution, from the preamble. On this Republic Day, perhaps more than ever, it is time for us to reflect on the Constitution and on the values that it enshrines, like equality, democracy, justice and liberty. Some of these values are under attack today, which is why you're seeing the pushback from the people of India and particularly from India's young, from its students. Joining us on Left, Right and Centre tonight for this special edition is historian Ramchandra Guha, and here in this audience with us, students from universities in Delhi and around Delhi. Thank you very much to all of you for coming in today. Ram Guha, more than a month later, what is the message that you're getting from these protests?
Well, I think the scale, the diversity, the spontaneity of the protests and their spread across India has been deeply impressive. It surprised the government. I think it's even surprised the critics of the government. And I think particularly the participation of the young and women has been quite extraordinary. It's on the whole been peaceful. There have been a few stray incidents of violence which have been used by the regime and by sections of the media to demonize the entire spectrum of protests. But it's been incredibly impressive, and it's appropriate that it's on the eve of the 70th anniversary of our enactment of the Constitution, because these protests, whether consciously or unconsciously, whether they intellectualize it or they express it emotionally, are embodying the spirit of the Constitution, and particularly the fact that the Constitution refuses to discriminate on the grounds of religion, which this Act blatantly does.
So what have you thought of the government's pushback on this, and the Prime Minister and the Home Minister's attempts in particular to try and explain this as something that was needed to shelter persecuted minorities from different countries, as something that would not target Muslims? They seem to be sort of tying themselves up in knots, frankly, yes, in that explanation.
Their attempts have been deeply unconvincing to justify this for several reasons. One is the Act itself is extremely illogical. So, for example, why are Tamils from Sri Lanka who are excluded, right? Many of whom are Muslims. Secondly, if you look at the prequel to the Act, what happened before, and the Home Minister's repeated insistence that the NRC would come along with the C.A.A., naturally Muslims are vulnerable. Also, if you look at the larger context of 5.5 years of NDA rule and the lynching, the demonization of Muslims, the fact that there's not a single Muslim MP in the Lok Sabha from the BJP, so, Muslims have entire reason to be insecure about the regime in general, the new Act in particular. And what is really particularly heartening about the protests is so many non-Muslims have joined. I mean, they have shown solidarity with their fellow Indians. And of course, Muslims themselves have invoked the flag and the Constitution, and Ambedkar and Gandhi, and Bhagat Singh, who stood above all for Hindu-Muslim Sikh harmony. So I think it's there are several things about the Act. One is, of course, it's illogical, it's immoral, and it's also ill-timed. There's an economic crisis, there's a downturn, there's joblessness, there's agrarian distress, there's environmental degradation, there's the deteriorating global environment. And why do you need this Act? In fact, there are already enough legal provisions on a case-by-case basis to give persecuted individuals shelter and citizenship. Now, this government should really roll back, and it should acknowledge
that. But it won't roll back.
Of course it won't roll back, but I think then the problems will intensify for the government and above all for the country, because, as I said, there's so many more urgent problems. Look at these young boys and girls here. What are their jobs? What are their opportunities?
Many of these young people here have been part of these protests against the Citizenship Act. Now, what does that signify to you, the fact that you have so many students that have been part of this resistance?
I think, of course, it will require a much more careful analysis. But my first impressions are the fact that the brutal attack by the police on Jamia and on AMU, and the dragging out girls from university libraries. During the emergency, students protested, but university libraries were not vandalized. During the 42 movement, even the viceroys did not vandalize university libraries. So I think students were outraged. how this happened. It shows that young people are idealistic. They don't want religious and gender discrimination. They've seen the world. They've seen what religious hatred and patriarchy has done to societies around us. And they stood in solidarity with their fellow citizens who they feel are being unfairly targeted. You remember that wonderful video that went viral of a young girl from Jamia, who I think was a Hindu from Ranchi, who said, "Ye mere dost hain, mujhe pata nahi kal ye Indians honge ya nahi." Now, it was a beautifully and movingly put video. So I think also the last thing, it's a kind of a last straw. I mean, this is this government has been hostile to science, scholarship, learning for a very long time, as shown in its its appointment of incompetent vice chancellors, education ministers who don't really make the cut. So students, I think there's accumulated, how do I put it, dissatisfaction with a government that does not recognize that in the 21st century, knowledge, learning, science are the key to economic growth and national greatness, not, all kinds of crazy, lunatic religious ideas.
Well, let's open that up then to the students here. They're the ones who are here to really ask you the questions. And this young man has a question for you. Introduce yourself.
My name is Akash Dhiman. I'm from Delhi School of Journalism, University of Delhi. So, sir, in Article 14, there is a provision of reasonable restriction called intelligible differentia. Of some says that this C.A.A. can pass the legality test in the court. So, what are your views on that provision?
I am not a constitutional expert. I'm not a legal expert. If you look at the contributions in the press of constitutional experts, my sense is a majority think this is unconstitutional. A few think it is past the constitutional test. But it's clearly immoral in its provision to say only countries that are Muslim majority will accept their refugees, and will accept refugees of all religions except Muslims. Now, it's clearly immoral, right? And I'm a biographer of Gandhi. And Gandhi taught us that there's a higher morality than legality, so if the narrow test, even if the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, upholds it, I hope they don't. I hope they see not just that this is immoral, but also illegal, because it strikes at the heart. It is plainly discriminatory. But the fact is that it introduces a religious-based test for citizenship, which has never been done before in our country. It's been done in other countries. It's been done in Sri Lanka or in Bhutan with Buddhist majority states. It's been done in Bangladesh and in Pakistan, where explicitly religion is tied to statehood and legality, right? So I think narrow legalistic interpretations, I think, are unconvincing. I think the best legal minds, if you read what Gautam Bhatia, Madhav Khosla, C. Rajkumar, who's Vice Chancellor of Jindal, have written, they are also clear that it's unconstitutional. There are one or two people on the other side, not surprisingly BJP supporters, lawyers who've done this, but it's clearly immoral. It's clearly discriminatory. There's no question about that. I think in the past, there have been many laws that have been discriminatory. But Gandhi started his career by protesting peacefully against a discriminatory law that disallowed Indians from owning property in white areas. So even if the Supreme Court upholds the law, I would say we should protest it, but non-violently.
All right. Well, let's get more quick questions. Yes, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. My name is Jen Chingalan Saldo from St. Stephen's. I'm from Manipur in the Northeast. In the passing of the C.A.A. and RSA has affected the Northeast a lot, especially in Assam. The internet was banned, and there were thousands of people protesting, but there was no news covering of that. So in country like India, where I'm being treated as a foreigner myself, can you share me your views how this protest will affect the Northeast India in today and the future generations of the Northeast people?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think the Northeast has been deeply affected by this. It's been made much more insecure.
For different reasons.
For different reasons.
Yeah.
Assam has one fear, Manipur another fear. But for the last 10 years, some kind of peace and stability was returning in the Northeast. There were negotiations going on with insurgent groups. There were very productive conversations with the neighboring countries, such as Bangladesh and Burma, so that we have a kind of economic exchange. Because for many people in the Northeast, trade and movement between these countries, rather than within India, would be economically beneficial. And we have taken the Northeast back. We've taken it back to fear, insecurity, violence, possibly civil war, right? And I think this is among the consequences of this act. Now, it's very typical of this government that it does something without thinking of the consequences. The same thing in Kashmir. Overnight, Article 370 was abolished, not knowing about either the domestic or the global consequences. Likewise with the C.A.A. You know, Modi and Shah come from Gujarat. They built their career, especially Modi, on Gujarati pride, regional pride, Gujarati asmita. He should have known, or the Home Minister should have known, that the Assamese also have their asmita. They also pride their language and the culture. The Manipuris also do, right? And to steamroll and homogenize, try to homogenize the whole country. So it's among other things, as I said, this act is spectacularly ill-timed. Forget the legality. Look at the multitude of problems we face. Economic, social, environmental, employment, education, regional instability. The Northeast,
we can't
5 or
afford
10
for
years
it to be
ago,
unstable.
was more stable than it had been for a very long time.
Yeah, but we
and
can't afford
taken
this
it back to the
instability.
60s and the 70s.
Let me get one more question from the students. Yes, can you pass the mic on? Yeah. And then I'll come back to my questions. And then
Hi, I'm Satviki from Miranda House. So I have a question. We students have been protesting for over a month and I haven't seen a concrete effect yet. So is there a concrete effect of these protests? If not, what do we do to have a concrete effect?
I am, can't advise. I'm not an activist. You have to follow your conscience. All I can say is two things. One is society and public opinion changes slowly. It took Gandhi 10 years in South Africa and 20 years in India to build a countrywide movement to shape and change public opinion and state laws. Secondly, you must always protest peacefully with dignity. You know, you may be willing to go to jail, but never use violent means or even violent language. But change takes place slowly, you know. And I think what you people have done across India, I mean the Delhi students of Delhi, but also the women of Shaheen Bagh, Bangalore, Calcutta, Allahabad, everywhere, have shifted the needle. The pole of fear has broken. We thought that the government can do what they want. They have 300 seats, they can transform the country in whatever direction they want, and we are voiceless, helpless. That's changed. Democracy is about more than elections. In the 5 years between one election and the other, citizens must affirm their rights, their views peacefully as often as they can. And these protests have transformed the discourse. They have brought attention not just to the discriminatory features of this act, but of the discriminatory policies of this government. They've shown that this government is not invulnerable, and they've brought to the fore a profound humanity where Indians will not discriminate on the basis of language and religion. So already what you've done is very good, even if the C.A.A. still stands.
I have a question for the students, though, if anyone here wants to answer it. To those who have been critical of the anti-C.A.A. protests as being either politically motivated or, initially there were some that had turned violent as well. Some have accused people of shouting, for want of a better word, anti-national slogans at Shaheen Bagh. Some of you may have been there. What would you say to those who are critical of the protests, or who think that students like you have been misled or brainwashed in a way into thinking this way? Anyone want to take that? Huh? Yes, just pass it back.
I'm Anushka Dasgupta from St. Stephen's College. Well, I personally think that there's a dearth of authentic source, and all those people, even those who are protesting and even those who are against the protests, they are all being guided by their ideological motives. So there's, as personally, in fact, I'm really baffled about everything that's going on. So I choose not to react to anything. So I believe that there's less discourse, there's less debate and discussion, and there are way more protests. So personally, I believe that there should be more awareness.
Being driven by whichever way they lean ideologically.
Yeah, both
rather
sides.
Than
in
facts.
fact, both have resorted to excesses in their own ways. So there is a lot of ideological motivation behind it, rather than fact check.
Interesting. Anyone else? This young man in the front.
So basically, what I believe that most of Indians do run by the information that they're fed from WhatsApp. So I request people who accuse that the protests are like this or like that, I request them to come and be a part of this protest. If they don't want to be a part of this protest, at least observe them at a personal level.
Correct.
That's what my concern is.
So you feel the criticism is unfair. Anyone else want to answer that? Yes. And then I'll come to Ram.
Good evening. My name is Devishi. I believe that, first of all, we have the right for dissent. So the people who are speaking against our right to speak up against what we believe, that is completely wrong. And also, I feel that the people are not reading from the right sources. They should rather first go and check their facts and then come to the table and talk about the issues factually rather than being driven emotionally. That's what I believe.
All right. Well, interesting to hear the responses of the students there. Ram Guha, though, if you just take a step back beyond the Citizenship Act protests for a moment, just to look at where we have come as a republic in all these decades, where do we stand today, and what would you say are the biggest challenges or the fault lines that we encounter now?
So that's a very good question, Nidhi. But before I talk about the challenges and the fault lines, let me say a little bit about what we've achieved. I often joke that if India had been a startup in 1947, not even the most venturesome venture capitalist would have invested in it. Everyone thought we'd collapse, we'd break up, we couldn't be a democracy, we'd become balkanized into many states. So the fact that we're still united, we are one country, we hold regular free and fair elections, we have freedom of speech, I think is something to be celebrated. So we've accomplished quite a lot. But it's been a rocky journey, and it may continue to be rocky unless we address these major fault lines we have. And in my view, it's my personal view, there are at least 4 major fault lines. One is the deepening majoritarianism and the demonizing of the Indian Muslims, who are Indian Muslims. Right? That is, I think, extremely worrying to me. The second is, attacks on women, Dalits and tribals, which still continue in many parts of India. The third is institutional decay, the fact that we can't trust the police. Are they acting on the behest of the chief minister or the law? We can't trust the income tax department. Are they acting on the behest of the home minister, or they actually transparently examining somebody's tax records? So even the Supreme Court is not seen in the same kind of objective, detached. We don't have the halo that it had. So the decline of institutions is very worrying, particularly because the democratic functioning depends on independent, autonomous, robust, credible institutions. And the last fault line, which is a particular concern to me and should be to the young, though it's not much talked about in the press or the media, is the deepening environmental crisis. We are an environmental basket case. Even if there was no climate change, India would be an environmental basket case, declining levels of the aquifer levels are declining, our rivers are dead, about the air in Delhi. And this also raises a major question marks about our future. So there are several fault lines that we have to address as citizens, in the media, and above all the government. And the C.A.A. is a total distraction from all of these.
When you talked about institutional decline, I want to particularly ask you about the judiciary and the Supreme Court in particular, because the last 6 months have been a big test for the Supreme Court also. And frankly, to many, it has felt as if the court has not lived up to do its duty, which is to protect liberty, to protect our rights, whether it is in Kashmir or elsewhere.
Without question, but except that I would say not just the last 6 months, the last 2 or 3 years, the court has not really distinguished itself. I mean, future historians of the Supreme Court will not regard this as one of the glorious chapters in the history of the court. It's been timid, it's sometimes been incredibly patronizing to tell Mehbooba Mufti's daughter, be careful, you'll feel cold in Srinagar. I mean, these kind of absurd comments, even our current Chief Justice has made comments that are totally gratuitous and unnecessary. And I mean, not to even habeas corpus. I mean, someone like Farooq Abdullah, 83-year-old man with the honorable record of serving the government for so long, is arbitrarily put under detention through a law which is not aimed at anyone but terrorists. Right. So I think the court has been timid, tawdry, and I think history will not judge it well. But having said that, maybe part of the problem has been that ordinary Indians have put too much faith in the court. They're so cynical about the government, they're apathetic about popular protest, they wish that the court will always be the redeemer and safeguard our democratic rights. So maybe we put too much faith in the courts, and we have to look at other democratic institutions.
Maybe it's time to also make our elected politicians more accountable and ask tougher questions. Does anyone have any last quick comments or thoughts that they want to share? Yeah, just wait for the mic. Just pass it on, please.
while the mic is coming, you're absolutely right. I think the court has been very timid about electoral bonds too.
Yeah, we're still awaiting the order on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
My question is related to C.A.A. Only. So not only Northeast, but in NCR region also we had internet shut down for a few days. And in this era of globalization and digitalization, we had to face internet shutdown for, I don't understand the reason why.
Absolutely.
And the patterns seem very similar to that of the emergency era.
Yeah.
What are your views on it? Are we very close to that stage?
Well, that's a very good question, and it sends a very bad signal. We claim to be the world's largest democracy, but when people want to congregate for a peaceful protest in Jantar Mantar, we shut down the internet and shut down 20 metro stations. And the whole world sees how hollow our claims are to being a robust democracy. Also, the whole world sees, investors see the state that the country is in. When the Home Minister blames the opposition and says anarchy has been created, what message is he sending the world? Right. So absolutely, I mean, our democratic credentials have been deeply damaged by the abuse of institutions and the internet shutdowns in Kashmir, which is now counting on 6 months, but many parts of India, including the capital. Right. Now, is it emergency-like? No, because in the emergency, the ruling party, Indira Gandhi's Congress party, controlled all major states except Tamil Nadu. With half of India outside the control of the BJP, I think a comparison with the emergency is a little far-fetched. I think federalism and pluralism is still the hope we have against authoritarianism.
Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that the opposition has largely not been able to take the lead on these protests, despite what the government may say?
Well, so far, I think Nidhi, a good thing. So I can only speak about Bangalore, where I have participated in several protests.
And got detained yourself.
And got detained myself. And in the detention center, where there were several hundred people with me, one group was overrepresented, students. One group was underrepresented, the Congress party, even though they're the main opposition party in Karnataka. Right. So far, I think it's been good. I think the left has taken part, but in a very small way. Among the chief ministers, Mamata Banerjee perhaps has been very active. But by and large, it has been a citizens' protest, which I think is good. Now, at some stage, what kind of electoral impact it will have, we'll have to see. But regardless of elections, I think this is an affirmation of Indian democracy, the ability of ordinary citizens to think for themselves and to redeem and reinforce the values of the Constitution. The reading of the preamble, the Tiranga Jhanda everywhere, portraits of Gandhi and Ambedkar. I mean, this is wonderful. This is truly wonderful.
But do you think it's possible that these protests could somehow lead to politically the opposition getting its act together?
It's very hard for me to say. It's very hard for me to say. It's impossible.
You made some very interesting comments about Rahul Gandhi in the last couple of days.
I've long believed that, I've long believed that the Congress has to move towards another form of leadership. It has to find, if you want to defeat Modi.
Why did you get defensive about those remarks, if I can ask you? Because you always maintained this about Rahul Gandhi.
Only because they were taken out of context. It was seen as an affirmation of Modi, which they absolutely were not. It was really a frustration and exasperation with the state of the Congress party. And if you want to defeat Modi, and I'm on the side of those who want to defeat Modi, you have to understand the roots of his popularity and appeal, and hence choose someone who can take him on. For example, some people whom I'm close to, my own name, tell me, why can't Ravish join politics? Your colleague Ravish, right? Why do they say that? Why do they say that? Because he's totally self-made, he's incredibly articulate, he's courageous, and above all, he speaks fabulous Hindi. A great South Indian politician, however courageous and independent-minded he or she is,
not having the Hindi.
Right. So it has to be someone like that. There are people in the Congress party. I would name them, but they would be, if I was to name them publicly, they would be crushed. Maybe I'll name them. Someone like the Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh could be a credible candidate. Amrinder Singh with his army record. And because, Nidhi...
can I ask you why you think...
One last thing. Because as you know, general elections have become increasingly presidential. So 2024 will come and you will need one face to oppose Modi. And it can't really be Rahul Gandhi.
Why do you think, though, that the Congress keeps going back to the Gandhis, despite the successive defeats?
You'll have to ask them. I don't know the answer. But it's clearly mystifying because India has changed. Young people here, how many of you think that dynasty is fine in politics? Not even one? I mean, not even one, okay. Yeah,
but most parties are dynasties in this country, not just the Congress.
But not fifth generation, and not the party of the freedom struggle, and not the only nationwide alternative to the BJP. That's the difference, you know. So, you know, I think, and because it's become presidential, I have nothing against Rahul Gandhi. Both you and I agreed that he's a perfectly likable, decent chap, right? Okay, but that's not enough. But I think the crystallization of these protests, I think the great thing about these protests is the pall of fear is broken. You don't think this regime is here forever. They can steamroll what they want. They did really awful things in Kashmir. Everyone was silent. They did other, but the C.A.A. has woken up the citizenry to the horrors of a top-down majoritarianism and the threat it poses to our democratic and plural traditions. And it's wonderful that on the anniversary of the 70th anniversary of the enactment of the Constitution, that we have this flourishing of democratic dissent.
All right, but Ramchandra Guha, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, and thank you to all of you here to ask him the questions that you did and to speak your minds. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. See you again tomorrow night. Goodbye.